'Cause you are on my side, I trust you with my life. I know my story, it isn't over, even against all odds. You are a faithful God, that's who you are.
Hello, I'm Dana Schmidt. I've been attending Christ Lutheran for almost 3 years, and I am very grateful to have found this church family. In the relatively short time I've been here, I can honestly say I have been blessed as well as changed by this church family, and I can clearly see the Lord working here at Christ Lutheran. About 6 months ago, when our dear friend and worship director, Robin Highland, and her family moved to Tennessee, I stepped in as the worship director for the 11 a.m. service, which is currently our 10 a.m. outdoor service. It has been such a joy and a blessing to join the staff, and I look forward to continuing to be a part of what God is doing here. A little side note, many of you have asked me if Eric Schmidt, who is the keyboardist for our 11 a.m. service, you've asked if we're related. We do have the same last name and all. So to put that question to rest, no, we are not. However, I do have family members here. My parents, Don and Kathy Vulich, began attending Christ Lutheran about a year prior to me, and after hearing how much they loved it here, I began attending with them. I became a member in October of 2019 because it was evident to me that a love for Jesus is alive at this church. This feels like home to me. God has already used this church community to impact my faith in huge ways, and I know he's got even more in store. A little background on me: I was born in Canoga Park on June 24th, 1979. I am the third born of my family. I have 2 older siblings and 1 younger. I grew up in Sylmar, right over the hill from us here, until I moved to Santa Clarita in 2000, and I grew up in the Lutheran church. I guess you could say I had a pretty normal childhood, which I now know from being a parent myself, that there really is no such thing as a normal childhood. But my childhood was normal in that it was filled with lots of love and laughter and lots of chaos and challenges. For my junior high and senior high school years, I went to a Baptist high school in the San Fernando Valley. And I have to pause here to give a shout out to Esther and Jason Segan, who also went to that same school. Esther is also on staff here at Christ Lutheran, and we both just smile at how God works and how he has brought us back into each other's lives again. It was at this school that I became involved in choir as well as a traveling ensemble, and I believe God used that time and those experiences to spark a deep passion in me to share my love for Christ through singing his worship. He was becoming real to me in a way that I'd not known before. But soon after I graduated high school, I started to pull away from God, from my family, from my church, and from myself. I had thoughts of suicide and had become extremely depressed. Although no one would have guessed any of that because I didn't dare show any of it on the outside. I believed that as a Christian, as someone who was reborn, that I had to maintain presenting a joy in the Lord with smiles and happiness. Well, I now know how truly destructive that way of thinking is. But see, I had a secret. Something I was hiding from and trying to remain joyful through, and it was a very evil thing that had been done to me. In the summer before my junior year, when I was 15, I was raped by my boyfriend, and I told no one for 2 years. I was ashamed and embarrassed, and it was my intent to keep this dark secret hidden. So I carried the burden myself. I rarely even talked to God about it. So great was my shame. And because I was hiding such a horrific experience, and even beginning to hide from God, I began making many unhealthy choices, including partying and drinking and surrounding myself with the wrong friends. I was trying so hard to mask the pain within. Now, I'm sure you're thinking that during this time in my life, during chaos and rebellion, would be a perfect time to meet my future husband, right? Well, that is actually the next part of my story. During all this distance from God, I met the man who would become my husband. When I was 18, we met when I was 18, and soon after that, I became pregnant at the age of 19, and my first son, Tristan, was born when I was 20. Now, I had always dreamed of being a mom, and although I knew my circumstances around it were very difficult, I was overjoyed to be having a child. Being a mother at that time, and still is now, one of my little pieces of heaven on earth, a true gift that God has given me. When my son was about 6 months old, I began attending church again, and I was determined to get my life back on track. And part of that goal was getting my then boyfriend to attend church with me. I wanted him to know God the way I did, and I wanted to raise our child in the faith. We got engaged shortly before my son's first birthday, and the pastor that was going to be marrying us asked my fiancé to commit to attending church for 6 weeks with me. And to my surprise and joy, he did. And praise God, he ended up liking my new church, and we continued attending as a family. We got married when I was 22, and soon after I had my second son, Azariah, when I was 23. By that time, my relationship with God had been completely renewed, and I was so grateful for where God led me in my relationship with him. I was back in leadership on the worship team at church, and I was overjoyed to be living in his grace that he had extended to me. A couple years later, I had my daughter Kira when I was 25. Yay, a girl. Life was so good. God was blessing me with so much that I had asked for. But as the years of marriage went on, things got more and more challenging as a young couple with 3 children. And it was during this time that I began to have my eyes and heart open to the fact that my marriage was not healthy and was in fact abusive, emotionally, verbally, and at times even physically. My husband had had a problem with drinking, as well as his anger, for almost the entire duration of our relationship together. But it was becoming increasingly worse and more often that my children and I were the recipients of his rage and abuse. I chose to put on the fake Christian smiles again, believing that they would convince everyone that everything was just fine. I didn't want anyone to know the horrific truth. After all that God had brought me through, I found myself questioning how I could possibly let myself show anything but a joy in him. And I therefore found myself in that fake Christian mode that had become so familiar and comfortable to me during my high school days. It was also during this time that God began to press upon me that something had to change in my marriage, for my sake and most of all for my children's sake. However, I struggled with how that would happen. I wrestled with that old mindset of believing that I had to maintain an image of perfect faith. So there I was again, covering up and hiding so much hurt and shame because I felt like it made me a weaker Christian if I let these things completely overwhelm me. I believed that God wanted me to just endure it, deal with it. Because wasn't it part of my walk with him to blindly keep my hope in him? And please don't get me wrong. When we do endure trials, he does desire for us to solely keep our hearts set on him. But that doesn't mean he wants us hiding from our true emotions that he gave us in order to keep up a fake faith. So in my effort to be something I wasn't, I began again to drift from God. The pressure of being perfect was too much to bear, and I was trying so hard to understand why. Why God would allow me and my children to be enduring this. And I struggled with why my faith wasn't making it better. Didn't God see how much I believed that he could fix it all? I had faith that he would, so why wasn't he? Yet again, my life of pretend led me to commit sins and make mistakes that I will never be able to take back. Several years into my marriage, during this time of heavy inner conflict, I strayed from my marriage vows that I made before God. I began to have a close friendship with a married man who also attended my same church, and it quickly became more than that. Life at home had become so painful that I found myself believing that God approved of the relationship for me because I didn't deserve what was being done to me by my husband. My focus became pursuing an earthly happiness for myself because I was trying desperately to maintain a heavenly hope and the joy that it brings. But no surprise, I discovered that earthly happiness really wasn't happiness at all. The relationship that I had developed with that man dwindled away, and I found myself still running from the fact that my marriage was a mess. And although the relationship with that man had ended, I still had myself convinced that it had been God-sent and that it helped me to see more clearly that I needed freedom from the abuse of my marriage. So I made the very difficult decision to file for divorce. I was heartbroken, but at the same time, I felt a certain peace about moving on. The months went on, and then when my husband and I were only weeks away from our divorce being final, I felt the Holy Spirit convict me of all that I had done in my wandering, in just the same way he convicted me of my wandering earlier in life. So I chose to meet with my husband and express to him that I felt we were making a mistake because we hadn't truly tried hard enough to do all that God would want us to do to save our marriage. To my surprise and relief, he agreed with me. So we stopped the divorce and agreed to start over. I told him of my affair and he forgave me, and I chose to forgive him for all that he had done. We both wanted to start with a clean slate. That clean slate worked for a while, but about a year after reconciling, things began to return to the state they were in before our separation. The abuse began again and had worsened, and so did my destructive patterns to portray fake happiness. It was also about this time that I began to struggle with my health. I was in constant pain and very lethargic much of the time, but I had no idea why. I thought it was just the stress of my marriage and the normal struggles of being mom to 3 young children. But I made myself see a doctor, and I was soon diagnosed with an autoimmune disease called fibromyalgia. I was shocked. I was too young to be dealing with a disease I couldn't even pronounce or spell. I was 29 years old and had to suddenly reevaluate my physical capabilities. I had to learn to slow down and take better care of myself. Things also remained very challenging in my marriage at this time and contributed to my declining health. And over the next couple years, I began to struggle with more and more new symptoms. So the next step was to see a specialist called a rheumatologist who did extensive blood work and tests, and I was then diagnosed with also having lupus and rheumatoid arthritis, both also autoimmune diseases. Again, I was devastated. I was then 31 years old and being told that I would be on medications for the rest of my life. At this point, I thought I had been hit hard enough to keep me knocked down for at least the next couple decades. But only 2 weeks after this second diagnosis, I was overwhelmed by devastation again. As I mentioned, the state of my marriage had been worsening, as were my health issues. So I finally reached out for the help I so desperately needed. God began to strengthen me to finally follow the guidance of his Spirit and take those necessary difficult steps he was leading me to take in order to protect myself and my children. I was receiving counsel from pastors and friends, and they were a huge part of my being able to finally confront my husband. But unfortunately, my husband was not walking the same path, nor was he willing to try to do so. He chose to file for divorce, and my children and I had to move in with my parents. Over the next few years, I was overwhelmed by the devastation that my marriage had ended, the intense pressure of being a single mom, and living with serious illnesses all at the same time. And my health issues had even worsened to the point of causing heart issues, vision problems, and seizures. I was in the hospital quite often and unable to work for 3 years. I also began to struggle with a deep depression, as I did after high school, and a spirit of anxiety was developing in me as well. I became more and more reliant on all the medications that I was being prescribed. In fact, as time went on, it seemed that they were the only thing that could get me through my day. To be honest, these medications became my savior. I got to the point where I felt I could do anything or face anything as long as I had them to make me feel better. They became my crutch for getting through all that I was carrying. And after about 5 years of slowly relying on them more and more, I found myself completely addicted to these medications, especially the pain and anxiety medications. It was so difficult to realize this because, of course, I had no intention. I had no intention of becoming addicted to them. They had just become a part of me, a part of my day, a part of my surviving. Sadly, relying on God as my healer had slowly become less of my heart's focus. I was again looking for the quick answer, the quick relief to my hurting, the physical and the mental. I still wanted to be able to smile through it all and not allow others to see what I was truly feeling. I was consumed with maintaining my perfect faith. But I began to realize that one of my biggest battles was not, in fact, these earthly sorrows I had been facing. But rather something I was doing to myself. God was showing me that I didn't know how to authentically live out what was in my heart. I had lived so long believing that my faith had to be done with a smile. I lived so long believing that I had to show the world and other Christians that since I believed anything to be possible with God, I had to simply walk around permanently happy like a robot. But in just the perfect way that God works, as I was beginning to finally throw away that old way of thinking, I found Christ Lutheran. When I first started attending, I became a part of Hank Clen's Bible study, and God used that wonderful group of people to be instrumental in strengthening my walk with him. I also began singing on the worship team here. The friendships I started to develop through that group also played a huge part in the renewing of my spirit. God continued to show me his goodness and his grace through that incredible group of people as well. He was again laying a foundation for me and igniting in me a passion to be an example of his love and grace by using my singing voice. In the very same way he had began that spark back in high school. And today it has grown to an even greater fire than I've ever experienced or felt. And again, I have to mention, I believe that so much of that is due to the love of Jesus that pours out of Christ Lutheran. So thank you for being the hands and feet of Jesus. Thank you for being part of my story, of God's faithfulness. As I conclude my story, I'd like to take a moment to encourage you with some things that God has been showing to me, and I pray that they are of value to you. Our strength cannot come from a belief that God will eliminate life's battles for us. Our strength cannot come through smiles and fake faith. We must instead find our strength in knowing with full confidence that walking with him makes this life become bearable, and it even becomes victorious. And the greatest reward is that God ultimately uses these hardships to draw us closer to him, so intimately close to him. And what greater gift could we experience here on earth? My current walk with God is like I've never experienced. And I know with great confidence it is because he is showing me how to truly live in his joy and his peace. He is guiding me and teaching me as I learn how to live as his child. My life hasn't become void of pain. I'm still facing many battles. But I'm learning to rely on prayer and his word as my strength, rather than a fake faith. I have come to see that the joy of the Lord comes from faith, that he ultimately overcomes all the evil of this world, the evil done to us and the evil we do to others. The joy comes from knowing that we will one day be free from all these burdens on earth. And what greater joy can we have than knowing that one day we will be completely at home in heaven, forever worshiping our Father? That joy is our strength. My story of faithfulness is one that has repeated through my life. It's truly my stories of faithfulness. God has shown me over and over again that he will always remain faithful through this life, no matter where I go. No matter what happens, he is there. Even when I wander, even when others break me, he is with me. As I look back on all that I've experienced, as well as all the mistakes I've made, all I can see is God's faithfulness in carrying me through. His faithfulness in extending his grace yet again and again. I have a few Bible verses I'd like to share, and then I'll bring things to a close. The first is Psalm 73:26. My heart and my flesh may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. This verse became very meaningful to me in the years when my illnesses were at their worst. And today it is a reminder of the healing he has done in me. I still struggle with my health, but God has healed me from the severity of what it was. And I can say today that through the grace of God only, I am free from the bondage of all those medications. I pray that same powerful healing over anyone watching this who may need it. It's possible with him. A second verse is Ezekiel 36:26. And I will give you a new heart, and a new spirit I will put in you. And I will remove the heart of stone from your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. I have prayed and reflected over this verse so many times I've lost count. This verse has reminded me to be surrendered to God molding and reshaping my heart. I encourage you to do the same. Using his word as a foundation for my prayers has made a huge impact on my walk with him. And lastly, Romans 8:28. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. This verse says it so simply, yet so eloquently. When we love God above all else, we can surrender to his promise that he will work things for our good. And that is my prayer for you tonight, to trust him and surrender to his good and perfect plan, because he is a faithful God.
surrounded on every side, can't see the light of day, but I am persuaded beyond all hope you won't let go of me. I stake my claim on every word you say, you will not be late. I will sing through fire and thunder, 'cause you are on my side. I trust you with my life. I know my story, it isn't over, even against all odds. For you are a faithful God. You're faithful God. The darkest of weather, though I can't see, I still believe you're good. So I'm moving forward through crashing waves. I know I'm safe with you. You hold my life, you hear my cry with every breath inside. I will sing through fire and thunder, 'cause you are on my side. I trust you with my life. I know my story, it isn't over, even against all odds. You are a faithful God. That's who you are. You are a faithful God. I am convinced that your promises will hold together, and I will dwell in the hope of your love forever. I am convinced that your promises will hold together, and I will dwell in your love. I will sing through fire and thunder, 'cause you are on my side. I trust you with my life. I know my story, it isn't over, even against all odds. And I will sing through fire and thunder, 'cause you are on my side. I trust you with my life. I know my story, it isn't over, even against all odds. Oh, you are a faithful God. That's who